Today we are pleased to welcome back to the FCPA Blog Joe Spinelli, Senior Managing Director at Kroll in the Investigations and Dispute Practice. Joe, welcome back.
Thank you.
Nice to see you again. And today we're going to talk about the Kroll Ethisphere Anti-Bribery and Corruption Benchmarking Report. But I think before we do, Joe, it was probably about a year ago when you wrote a blog piece for the FCPA Blog on the Yates Memo. So, Joe, with a year in the rearview mirror and not wading into the current sort of enforcement and regulatory discourse, how do you rate sort of the last year of enforcement under the Yates regime, for lack of a better word? Were you pleasantly surprised, mildly disappointed? Did it move the needle?
I was surprised, but not in the way I thought I was going to be surprised.
Okay.
If you look at 2016, it was a very robust year for corporate in FCPA, prosecutions, but not individuals. There were 25 corporate resolutions that DOJ came out with. It basically resulted in $2.4 billion in revenue. However, conversely, if you look at the Yates memo and the effect it had or didn't have, you find out that DOJ had one corporate resolution involving an individual. The SEC did a little better. They had 8. That's not to say that that's going to be the norm going forward. I think personally that what you're going to find, more and more individuals will come forward. And I think it's already in the works. I think there are several major investigations that are ongoing as we speak that are going to result in individuals coming forward, and they're going to be individuals being prosecuted. So I think the Yates memo will show its worth going forward.
So is it a little bit of the wheels of government move at their own pace? So maybe it's not fair to look at the first year in terms of how these cases start and how they get prosecuted.
I think it's a combination of that, and also getting the word out. I mean, it takes time for the government to get its message out, that the importance of full cooperation to get credit, and to be able to disclose the individuals involved as a prerequisite to get that credit. I think as that continues to unfold, you're going to see, I think, more and more cases come out because of the Yates memo.
Interesting.
I'm a big fan of Sally Yates.
Well, we'll keep watching then.
Okay.
Appreciate that. So moving on to current business, the Kroll Ethisphere report, it's a fascinating report. And section 1 is on the rise of reputational risk. So in what Allison Taylor and James Cohn call our world of hyper-transparency, Joe, this seems to be a greater issue. So I don't think reputational risk was even on last year's report. How did it make it to section 1 this year? What was sort of the big driver of that change?
If I had to attribute that to one variable, it would be the involvement of the board and C-suite individuals, more so now than ever before. I think that they're very sensitive to the type of reputational damage, how it lasts and how it's indelible, and how it can taint an organization. Their direct involvement now is far greater in the actual participation and oversight of the compliance program. Also, taking a look at the risks. Now I'm seeing board members directly involved in risk assessments. They want to know and they want to see the reports on a daily basis, day to day. They want to know how they're being addressed. They want to make sure that there's an individual who's going to be held accountable for enforcing it and effectuating the type of change that needs to be, completed before they can preclude those risks from coming to fruition in a negative way.
Well, you mentioned the board and the C-suite's awareness and attention to this. So, Joe, do you think the driver behind that is just regulation and enforcement, or is it our news feed to where the board and the C-suite are saying, that's not where we want to end up? So what's really, drawing them to have greater interest in this issue?
I don't think any of them want to end up there. I think that's a fair assumption. But I also think that they understand that the stakeholders' lawsuits that have been coming out left and right make them vulnerable if, in fact, they don't in a proactive way address the potential problems. So when you see C-suite individuals involved in the actual selection of third parties, that was unprecedented. I had not seen that before. I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing them overseeing the actual role that a chief compliance officer should and will have over third-party selection. I also see them, directly involved in the actual process itself, where business sponsors are getting out the questionnaires. They're scrutinizing questionnaires to ensure that the right questions are being asked, and then it's not going to be the business sponsor making any determinations here. It's going to be the business sponsor to the compliance officer, to the general counsel, and then the general counsel will have that discussion with the board members.
So you're saying the board is looking for that sort of visibility? I mean, we're not even talking like A-level reports. We're talking B's and C's.
Yeah,
They're taking that kind of interest?
Absolutely. Direct interest and are scrutinizing the reports I'm talking about and alluding to. And also, what I see is their recognition of the fact that they themselves are going to be held accountable now in such a way that their performance will be evaluated as to how well they are scrutinizing third parties and whether or not they're going to be kept on the board and whether they're going to be compensated for their efforts.
It's like you used to hear if a board would see that there was very little activity, let's say on a hotline, they would be, okay, that's good, there's not much activity. Now it's the opposite. They want to know why there's not more use of hotlines and the ability for people to potentially report wrongdoing.
What I'm seeing now, and I've just have seen it recently, C-suite individuals saying, show me the calls that we've gotten, show me the allegations, more importantly, show me what was done with those allegations. I want to see the sufficient documentation that we could show and illustrate to the government we sufficiently followed up on every allegation. We must have that in the files. It must be done in such a way that, if in fact the government comes calling, we can show that we didn't take that lightly, that we followed up on it and we did an incisive investigation and brought it to a conclusion.
So in the compliance discourse, there's a lot of discussion right now, Joe, on the role of the board. From your experience and practice, is it the audit committee that's sort of taking the leadership here, or do you see that the entire board is getting involved? Like, how does that look in terms of, where the board sort of focuses their energy?
I think the board has become so sophisticated that they interact not just with the audit committee, but now they've formulated compliance committees and oversee them also. And they have a direct role in the oversight, day-to-day operations, what should be done, what policies and procedures need to be updated, how often are the third-party due diligence completed for each individual that they're doing business with, or doing business on their behalf. So yeah, they have a direct role in so many different things that they never associated themselves with in the past. And that to me is a good thing, because what it does is it establishes the right tone at the top and also the culture. I mean, if you see your CEO or someone on the board saying, hey, this is the way we do business, and anything else is unacceptable. We have a zero tolerance for corruption here. We don't pay bribes. Most of them now are walking away from even considering facilitating payments. They don't want to subject themselves to potential problems.
In some ways, that's the ultimate measure of a compliance program is if the moment arises, are you willing to walk away from the business?
True. And, they'll walk away from third parties, too, if they decide that the third party is not amenable to certifying that they've done the training, that they accept the policies and procedures of the compliance program. What I hear now is we don't need those individuals and we're not going to associate with them.
And sometimes those markets aren't even worth it. And how much you might have to invest in due diligence and, sort of embedded compliance relative to the potential market gain, it might not be worth it.
The problem is sometimes, in all fairness to the corporate world, is that they get into markets where there might be just one third party that could actually accomplish what they're looking to accomplish. And, what happens then if they do a third party, they risk rank that third party and he comes into a high category? All right, they do the on the ground boots, enhanced due diligence if necessary, but they still have, it still doesn't pass what they call the smell test, and they're not happy with what the findings are. So they what they do then is they'll conduct business with them, but they'll monitor that third party far greater than they would someone else. And what I mean by that is there'll be more interval monitoring of that individual to ensure there's no government association, no interaction with with foreign officials that could in fact jeopardize their status in that particular locale. So yeah, I mean they always want to be a step ahead of the problem. And if they're proactive in doing the type of due diligence and they show that they've made a good faith effort, even when there's a rogue third party, I think the government will be very receptive and understanding that it happens, and they've done everything humanly possible to enjoin that before the fact.
So this really shows how compliance is evolving. That it's a part of, or it's becoming a greater part of the actual business operations. It's ethics and integrity. Great phrases, great words. It sounds like the way you're describing it, they're becoming operationalized.
When you see compliance officers having a seat at the table, so to speak, when they're of board level status as being compliance officers, when they're recognized as being senior officials in an organization, that elevates the importance of what they do each and every day. And that's where the organization wants to be.
Excellent. Well, let's return to Cohn and Taylor's world of hyper-transparency, because we've had so many different corporate...
The holistic approach.
The holistic approach, exactly. And when you look at companies that have been through these corporate issues, some might call them disasters, like Volkswagen, the Mylan EpiPen, and Wells Fargo. So these aren't anti-bribery, or these are not, FCPA issues. But still, in our world of anti-bribery compliance, are there any lessons from those particular corporate episodes that we can extract relevant to our world?
Ironically, Senator Elizabeth Warren came out yesterday and demanded the resignation of 12 board members from Wells Fargo.
Right.
And she was very explicit as to the reasons why, which I think pertain to your question. All of the three had common denominators. They had inefficient corporate governance. They had very poor internal controls. They did not have the right tone at the top that we're talking about today. They had very bad business incentives, which contributed to their problem. And at the end of the day, they had the wrong culture. They didn't have the right culture that we try and see instilled in an organization, which would definitely rise to the top, and someone would report if they saw that type of misconduct. And many individuals saw the type of misconduct that existed in all three of those organizations at that particular time. So, and that was Senator Warren's, what she was basically accentuating yesterday in her statement, that this is not a one-off. This is something that seems to happen all too often in corporate America when there is insufficient corporate governance and poor internal controls.
And that sort of goes back to your prior messages that this is about board engagement, about leadership engagement.
Yeah, exactly. And if you did a comparison of what I discussed as far as boards and C-suite individuals having direct involvement in compliance on a day-to-day basis in most organizations, and do a comparison of the three we just mentioned, they come up far short.
And by the way, if you're interested in this, I just finished Jack Ewing's book, New York Times reporter, Faster, Higher, Farther, about Volkswagen. Absolutely fascinating. And I'd say the biggest component of that book relates to corporate governance.
Well, I feel better about saying that now.
Joe, what about reputational risk? So bringing it back into this field, you talk about due diligence. So, there were traditional risk factors in a due diligence process, okay, in terms of public searches, you're looking through the corporate registries, sort of the quantifiable part of a due diligence process. How do you deal with reputational risk in a due diligence process? It seems more of a narrative, so how do you measure and how do you mitigate?
Well, it's the process itself that has to be, really examined. And I would advise all my clients, and I do all the time, let's go back to 2008, and let's take a look at DOJ's opinion release 08-02, They were very explicit.
Sure.
What were their expectations? They wanted you to risk rank your third parties into a high, medium, or low category. And when they fell into a high category, it was expected that you would do enhanced due diligence. Okay, great. But let's take it back a step. When you issue that questionnaire, I scrutinize these questionnaires all the time. What questions are you asking the third parties? Too often they're omitted on those questionnaires. The questions that are pertain to various foreign officials, government entities, associations with government. How, in fact, did that third party come to us in the first place? Were they a recommendation from a government official? Was it a prerequisite to get the business that you had to hire them? Is the compensation justified? Where did they do business? What's the geography? Is it a high-risk jurisdiction? I mean, all of this plays into one big risk assessment that has to be conducted when you look at third parties. And I believe that without a comprehensive risk assessment, such as what I just alluded to, you're going to run into problems every time. And what I'm seeing is, and I'm seeing it more and more, is that the process I just mentioned with business sponsors getting involved from the inception and putting the questionnaires out, it doesn't end there anymore when the questions come back, and the answers come back. That's where it starts, because then the business sponsor has a direct obligation to send that to the compliance officer.
Sure.
Compliance takes a look at it, okay? They're satisfied. They think, okay, this looks pretty good. What do they do with it? They send it to general counsel. And general counsel is going to scrutinize that very, very closely and meticulously and say, okay, we still believe, based on our comprehensive risk assessment from the inception, there's still potential problems here. From a business perspective, is it worth for us to get involved? Because long range, we may pay a bigger price because we did. Okay? And then, now, as I said previously, it's elevated to the board. And the board sometimes will make the final decision whether or not they're actually going to disqualify that third party or they're going to go with them. So all of that plays into the type of risk. It's got to be a comprehensive risk assessment from the very beginning. That's going to, I think, determine whether or not you're going to, one, have evidence that you've done the comprehensive due diligence that was expected. Two, that you can justify doing business with the individual. And three, that you're hopefully going to be able to preclude the type of reputational damage we're talking about.
So just the final question, are companies doing this before the boots hit the ground? Because I think if you start doing it once you're already engaged in the market, you might have certain, I think they call it confirmation bias, where now you're trying to justify existing business activities.
You have to do it before. It's got to be proactive. Again, if you look at the expectations of DOJ, they were very explicit. They expect you to risk rank those third parties long before you ever commit to doing business with them. So yeah, I mean, and you better be able to show that you've done the enhanced due diligence. And here's the other part of the equation. It's nice to say you've done enhanced due diligence, but you've got to have the prerequisite expertise in those locales. People who know how to do investigations, people who speak the language, people who understand the customs of that particular locale. And all of that plays into whether or not they can professionally and legally ascertain the information necessary, which would give you and put you in a position to make an informed judgment whether or not you want to do business with that third party.
And it's all about informed decisions, isn't it?
That's absolutely at the end of the hunt right there. Absolutely.
Joe, great to see you again.
Good to see you again, Richard.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.